In the realm of criminal investigations, few scenarios are as chilling as the betrayal of trust within a domestic setting. We are examining the case involving Ashley Buzzard and the individual known as Melodee. This is not merely a story of a disappearance. It is a complex narrative of alleged calculation, movement, and a journey that investigators believe was never intended to be a family vacation. The events that unfolded in October of this year have left a community in California and observers across the nation grappling with profound questions about the nature of guardian responsibility and the darkness that can hide behind a seemingly ordinary road trip. The timeline of this case begins on October the 7th. According to investigative reports, this is the date when Ashley Buzzard and Melodee departed from their residence in California. To the outside observer, this might have appeared to be a standard excursion, two individuals setting out for a change of scenery. However, law enforcement officials have since characterized this departure not as a leisure activity, but as the commencement of a sinister plot. The destination was reportedly Nebraska, a significant distance that would require days of travel, traversing vast stretches of the American landscape. It is crucial to analyze the context of this trip. Road trips are typically associated with bonding, exploration, and making memories. Yet, as we delve deeper into the timeline provided by the sheriff's office, the atmosphere surrounding this specific journey feels markedly different. There is a sense of purpose that does not align with tourism. Investigators allege that the planning involved in this movement was meticulous, describing it as having a level of criminal sophistication that is rare and difficult to comprehend. This suggests that the decision to leave California on October the 7th was not a spontaneous whim, but part of a larger, darker design. The journey took them across state lines, moving from the coast towards the interior of the country. The critical moment in this timeline occurs 2 days later, on October the 9th. This date marks the last verified sighting of Melodee. The location of this sighting is significant. It was near the border shared by Colorado and Utah. This area is known for its rugged terrain, its isolation, and its vast, empty spaces, factors that often complicate search efforts and forensic investigations. From an analytical perspective, the choice of this route and the timing of the disappearance raise immediate red flags. Why did the sighting trail end there? What transpired in the vehicle between California and that desolate border region? The silence that follows October the 9th is deafening. In missing person cases, the initial timeline is vital. And here, the timeline abruptly shifts from a presence to an absence. The subject, who should have been safe in the care of the suspect, simply vanishes from the record after this point. Critics and legal analysts looking at the case have pointed out the chilling nature of this window of time. Between the departure on the 7th and the disappearance on the 9th, there were countless miles of road, fueling stops, and potential interactions. Yet, the narrative provided by the suspect later would offer conflicting details, mentioning a couple met at a zoo and a handover that lacks any credible verification. This introduces the concept of the unreliable narrator into the investigation immediately. The story of a random meeting and a handover of care to strangers is a trope often seen in these types of investigations when a suspect is trying to deflect culpability. The vanishing on October the 9th is the pivotal tragedy. It marks the transition from a physical journey to a criminal mystery. The individual was allegedly taken to a location that was remote, a place where the noise of the world falls away, leaving only silence. The authorities have described the actions taken during this time as ruthless and cold-blooded. These are strong descriptors for law enforcement to use in official press conferences, indicating the severity of the evidence they have gathered. As we close of the timeline, we are left with the image of a vehicle moving through the vast American West. Inside, there were 2 occupants, but as the miles accumulate, the intent of the driver becomes the central focus of the inquiry. The departure was public, but the events at the Utah border were hidden, shielded by the isolation of the landscape. This was the beginning of the end for Melodee, and the start of a deception that Ashley Buzzard would allegedly attempt to maintain upon her return. Your support shines a light into the shadows where the truth has been hidden. Please like and subscribe to give a voice to those left in the silence. Stay with us, because the calculated deception we are about to uncover defies every instinct of human nature. If the departure was unsettling, the return was undeniably alarming. On October the 10th, just one day after the last verified sighting of Melodee, Ashley Buzzard returned to her home in California. The most harrowing detail of this return is the solitude. She arrived alone. The vehicle that had left with 2 occupants returned with only 1. The passenger seat was empty. The individual was no longer present. This immediate return to the point of origin is a significant behavioral marker. Typically, if a tragedy occurs during a trip, an accident, a medical emergency, or an abduction by a third party, the natural human response is to remain in the area, to contact local authorities, and to frantically search for the missing individual. One does not simply turn the car around and drive hundreds of miles back home as if the trip had concluded naturally. The decision to return to California on October the 10th, leaving the daughter behind in a different state, suggests a desire to distance oneself from the scene of the incident. Upon her return, observers noted a disturbing sense of normalcy. Neighbors and family members did not witness the panic or devastation one would expect from a person who has lost a family member. Instead, the routine seemed to resume. This business-as-usual demeanor is frequently cited in criminal psychology as a coping mechanism or a calculated effort to avoid suspicion. However, in this context, it serves to deepen the suspicion. How does one sleep, eat, or function knowing that a dependent family member is missing in a remote location states away? Investigative reports indicate that in the weeks following her return, Ashley lived her life without the individual, maintaining a facade that hid the grim reality. There were no immediate calls for help. The frantic pleas usually seen in these cases were absent. In fact, later details would emerge suggesting that she even pulled down missing person posters, an action that speaks volumes about her intent to control the narrative and suppress the truth. This behavior aligns with the prosecution's assertion of premeditation and planning. It was not a chaotic aftermath of an accident. It appeared to be the calm aftermath of a completed task. The contrast between the 2 dates is stark. October the 9th. The daughter is lost in Utah. October the 10th. The mother is home in California. The speed of this transition implies a directness of purpose. There was no lingering, no searching. The drive back would have taken many hours spent alone in the vehicle. Analysts question what was going through the mind of the driver during that long, solitary journey back to the coast. Was there remorse? Or was there merely the calculation of the next steps to cover the tracks? Furthermore, the investigation revealed that during this period, Ashley allegedly engaged in deceptive practices to hide her movements. We learned of the use of rental cars and the swapping of license plates. We learned of tactics like backing into fueling stations to hide the tag from surveillance cameras. These are not the actions of a grieving parent. These are the tradecraft of someone trying to become invisible. This level of evasion points to a consciousness of guilt that formed even before she arrived back at her residence. The community was largely in the dark during this initial phase. To those around her, the absence of the daughter might have been explained away with simple lies. Perhaps she was visiting relatives, or perhaps she was at a camp. This period of time, where the subject lies undiscovered and the suspect walks free, is often the most painful for the extended family to look back on. The paternal grandparents, who later expressed that they felt something was wrong in their hearts, were left in a state of unknowing. They sensed a shift, a quietness. But the concrete truth was being actively withheld by the one person who knew it. The solo return is a powerful piece of circumstantial evidence. It contradicts the natural instincts of parenthood. It defies the logic of innocent tragedy. By returning alone on October the 10th, Ashley Buzzard allegedly signaled that involving her daughter was closed in her mind, while for the rest of the world, the nightmare was just beginning to unravel. The emptiness of the home upon her return stands as a haunting testament to the events that transpired in the desert. When investigators began to peel back the layers of Ashley Buzzard's movements, they discovered a narrative that stood in stark contrast to the idea of a spontaneous family tragedy. Law enforcement officials have publicly characterized the actions taken by the mother as being calculated and criminally sophisticated. This terminology is significant because it suggests that the incident was not a result of a sudden loss of control or a momentary lapse in judgment, but rather the outcome of a meticulous and dark design. The authorities emphasized the premeditation and heartlessness that went into the planning phase, indicating that the events were orchestrated long before the departure from California. A key component of this alleged sophistication was the deliberate effort to evade detection. According to the investigation, Ashley did not simply use her personal vehicle for the entirety of the timeline. Reports indicate that there was a strategic use of a rental car, a common tactic employed by individuals seeking to distance their identity from a specific location or event. The use of a rental vehicle complicates the digital footprint, making it more difficult for automated license plate readers and traffic cameras to immediately associate a specific movement with the suspect's primary registration. Furthermore, the behavior exhibited during the journey revealed a high level of situational awareness regarding surveillance. Police noted that the driver would specifically back into parking spots at service stations. In the context of a criminal investigation, this is interpreted as a counter-surveillance measure designed to conceal the license plate from the view of dashboard cameras or security systems, often positioned at the front of parking stalls. This small but critical detail paints a picture of a driver who was hyper-aware of being watched and was actively taking steps to remain invisible to the electronic eyes that line modern roadways. The license plate swapping, mentioned in investigative summaries, further solidifies the theory of a planned deception. Changing identifiers on a vehicle is a deliberate act intended to confuse law enforcement and delay the tracking process. When one combines the rental car usage, the backing into parking spots, and the plate manipulation, the evidence points toward a sinister plot rather than an innocent road trip. These are not the actions of a panicked parent. They are the actions of someone operating with a clear, albeit tragic, objective. Legal analysts reviewing these details have pointed out that this level of ruthlessness in committing the act sets this case apart. The prosecution will likely argue that the time and effort spent on these evasion tactics prove that the intent to end the life of the subject was formed well in advance in California, before they ever crossed state lines. The sophistication of the plan serves as a chilling testament to the betrayal of trust, as the young family member was unknowingly being transported by a guardian who was simultaneously plotting how to get away with her permanent disappearance. The search for Melodee came to a heartbreaking conclusion in the vast, open landscapes of Utah. On December the 6th, authorities were contacted regarding the discovery of the missing subject in a remote area. This date marks the shift from a missing persons investigation to a death investigation. The location of the discovery is crucial to the narrative. It was far removed from the safety of her home in California, in a place where silence reigns. The choice of such a desolate area aligns with the earlier evidence of a calculated attempt to hide the truth permanently. The identification process was not immediate, which adds another layer of tragedy to the timeline. Although the discovery was made on December the 6th, the positive identification of the remains as those of Melodee did not occur until December the 22nd. This delay of over 2 weeks suggests that the condition of the evidence required scientific intervention to confirm identity. In cases where a significant amount of time has passed since the incident, from early October to December, the biological breakdown of the subject can make visual identification impossible. Forensic teams had to rely on DNA evidence to make the final confirmation. The investigation linked the remains found in the Utah desert directly to the mother, Ashley Buzzard, through genetic testing. This scientific link was the final piece of the puzzle needed to transition the case from a suspicion of foul play to a confirmed fatality. The term lifeless form is often used in these somber moments to describe the reality of the scene without resorting to graphic imagery, preserving the dignity of the subject who was left behind. The geographical context of the discovery also raises questions about the road trip narrative. The location was near the border, where the last verified sighting took place. It suggests that the journey ended for the daughter, exactly where the electronic trail went cold. The discovery site became a silent witness to the final moments of the timeline. For the family waiting for news, the period between the discovery and the identification was undoubtedly a time of agonizing suspense, ending in the confirmation of their worst fears just days before the holidays. The recovery of the subject allowed investigators to perform the necessary examinations, which would later provide the specific cause of the tragedy. However, the mere fact that she was found in such a distant and isolated location speaks to the heartlessness described by the sheriff's office. It implies that the subject was left behind, left to the elements, while the person responsible returned to the comforts of home. In many criminal investigations, ballistic evidence serves as the undeniable fingerprint that connects a suspect to a crime scene. In the case against Ashley Buzzard, this forensic link is described by authorities as particularly strong. The investigation revealed that the subject had sustained multiple injuries consistent with the discharge of a firearm. This specific cause of the tragedy shifted the focus to locating the weapon and connecting it to the mother. The critical breakthrough came from the comparison of cartridge casings. Investigators found spent cartridge cases at the location in Utah where the daughter was discovered. These small metal casings are ejected from a firearm when a shot is fired and often carry unique markings, microscopic scratches and impressions left by the firing pin and ejector mechanism of the gun. These markings are as unique as a human fingerprint. Simultaneously, during the search of Ashley Buzzard's residence, authorities located a matching spent casing. Forensic analysis confirmed that the casing found at the remote scene in Utah and the casing found at the mother's home in California were fired from the same weapon. This evidence creates a direct physical line connecting the suspect's home to the location of the tragedy, bridging the hundreds of miles that separate them. It dismantles any defense, suggesting that someone else might have been responsible or that the mother was not present at the final scene. Additionally, the search of the rental vehicle provided another piece of damning evidence. Investigators found a live round of ammunition in the car that looked similar to the casings found at the scene. The presence of this live ammunition in the vehicle used during the trip places the means of the incident directly in the hands of the driver. It supports the timeline that the weapon was transported from California to Utah and used to carry out the cold-blooded act. Legal experts analyzing this evidence have noted its strength. As one former prosecutor observed, criminals often believe that disposing of the weapon is enough to sever the tie to the crime. However, they frequently forget about the casings or the unique markings that ammunition can carry. In this case, the preservation of the casing at the home and the discovery of the matching casing in the desert provide what is often referred to as a ballistic match, which is difficult for a defense team to explain away. The ballistics do not lie. They place the instrument of the tragedy in the possession of the accused. The revelation that the subject was linked to ballistic evidence adds a layer of violence to the narrative that contrasts sharply with the mother's silent and detached demeanor upon her return. It confirms the special allegation of using a firearm mentioned in the charges filed against her. The culmination of the multi-state investigation arrived with a sudden and decisive operation just 2 days before the holiday. On December the 23rd, federal agents from the FBI, working in conjunction with local sheriff's deputies, descended upon the residence of Ashley Buzzard. This operation marked the formal end of the search for answers and the beginning of the legal pursuit of justice for Melodee. The arrest was the result of weeks of forensic analysis and the crucial identification of the remains found in the Utah desert, linking the tragedy directly to the mother. Following the apprehension, the legal system moved swiftly. For the very next day, prosecutors filed serious felony charges against Ashley. She stands accused of the most severe violation of the law, the intentional taking of a life. The official criminal complaint alleges that the act was not only intentional, but was carried out with criminal sophistication and premeditation. These legal terms are significant. They suggest that the authorities have evidence proving this was not a spur-of-the-moment incident, but a carefully orchestrated event designed to end a life and conceal the truth. During her arraignment, Ashley appeared in court to face these allegations. In a moment that was broadcast to the public, she entered a plea of not guilty. This procedural step sets the stage for a trial where the burden of proof will rest on the state to demonstrate her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The courtroom atmosphere was tense, with reactions audible from the gallery as the charges were read. It is a stark reminder of the emotional weight this case carries for the community and the extended family who are left grappling with the loss. A critical development in the legal strategy emerged early in the proceedings. The district attorney's office announced that they would not be seeking the death penalty in this case. This decision has sparked considerable debate among legal analysts and the public. While the crime is described by law enforcement as cold-blooded and ruthless, prosecutors often weigh various factors such as the mental health history of the defendant and the desire to secure a conviction without the lengthy appeals process associated with capital punishment when making such determinations. By removing the death penalty from the table, the prosecution may be aiming for a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, ensuring the accused remains incarcerated for the remainder of her natural life. The arrest also highlighted the solitary nature of the alleged crime. Ashley is the only person charged in connection with the death of Melodee. Despite early speculation about potential accomplices or a larger network, the indictment focuses squarely on the mother. This reinforces the narrative that she acted alone, driving the vehicle, executing the plan, and returning to her life of deception without assistance. As the legal process unfolds, the focus will remain on dissecting her actions during those critical days in October and proving that she was the sole architect of this heartbreak. As investigators built their case, a piece of evidence emerged that offers a chilling glimpse into the mindset of the accused. A family friend, identified as Tyler, provided authorities with a secret audio recording of a conversation he had with Ashley during the time Melodee was still considered a missing person. This audio is pivotal because it captures the voice and the demeanor of the suspect in a candid, unscripted moment, stripping away the silence she maintained with law enforcement. In the recording, Ashley can be heard making statements that are both bizarre and revealing. She demands to be treated with a specific level of respect, stating, "Quiet and listen. Please look at me like I'm an intelligent woman, 40 years old." This assertion of intellect and control contrasts sharply with the chaotic reality of her situation. It suggests a person who is highly conscious of her self-image and how she is perceived by others, even while she is allegedly concealing a horrific truth about her daughter's fate. Perhaps the most disturbing element of this recording is her claim regarding Melodee's whereabouts. Ashley allegedly told the witness that she had given her daughter away to a couple she met at a zoo. She could not provide names, addresses, or contact information for these individuals. This narrative, which the witness described as bizarre and making no sense, is a classic example of deflection. Analysts argue that this fabrication was a desperate attempt to explain the absence of the daughter without admitting to the tragedy. It introduces a conflicting narrative that the defense may struggle to explain. Why would a mother hand the subject to strangers and then fail to keep any record of their identity? The audio also captures Ashley, describing herself as a really good liar in a criminal trial. Such an admission can be devastating. It directly attacks her credibility and suggests that her public displays of confusion or detachment may have been a performance. Furthermore, she makes strange comments about false advertising and refers to media attention, indicating a preoccupation with her own narrative rather than the safety of the missing family member. This main character syndrome, as some commentators have termed it, points to a deep-seated narcissism where the needs of the daughter were secondary to the mother's desire for control or attention. This secret recording serves as a window into the psychological state of the accused. It does not sound like the rambling of someone who has completely lost touch with reality in a clinical sense. Rather, it sounds like the manipulation of someone trying to talk their way out of a corner. Legal experts suggest this evidence could tip the scales of justice, as it undermines any potential defense strategy, portraying her as a helpless the subject of circumstance. Instead, it paints a portrait of a woman who was actively spinning a web of deceit while her family and the authorities were desperately searching for the truth. As the case against Ashley Buzzard transitions from the investigative phase to the judicial phase, the focus shifts to the strategies that will be employed inside the courtroom. The legal proceedings began with the arraignment, where Ashley entered a plea of not guilty to the charge of ending the life of her daughter. This plea is a standard procedural step, yet it sets the stage for a contentious legal battle where the defense will attempt to dismantle the narrative constructed by the prosecution. Legal analysts observing the case have identified three primary pillars that will likely define the upcoming trial: the decision regarding capital punishment, the question of the defendant's mental state, and the complex issue of jurisdiction. The first major development in the legal strategy was the announcement by the prosecution regarding the ultimate penalty. In a move that surprised some observers, given the cold-blooded nature of the allegations, the district attorney's office stated that they would not seek the death penalty for Ashley Buzzard. This decision removes the possibility of capital punishment from the table, leaving life imprisonment as the maximum potential sentence. Legal experts have offered various interpretations of this decision. Former prosecutors note that death penalty cases require a significantly higher burden of proof regarding aggravating circumstances and often involve years, if not decades, of appeals. By opting not to pursue this path, the state may be prioritizing a swifter resolution for the family of the subject. However, some analysts, like attorney Tommy Pope, have argued that keeping the death penalty as an option initially can provide the prosecution with leverage during plea negotiations. By removing it this early in the process, the state has arguably reduced the pressure on the defendant to accept a plea deal for life without parole. The second, and perhaps most volatile, aspect of the defense strategy revolves around the mental state of the accused. The behavior exhibited by Ashley returning home alone, living as if nothing happened, and the bizarre stories about giving her daughter to strangers at a zoo naturally leads to speculation about an insanity defense. In the legal system, there is a distinct difference between competency, the ability to understand the proceedings, and insanity, the inability to distinguish right from wrong at the time of the act. The secret recording provided by the witness Tyler presents a significant challenge to any potential insanity claim. In the audio, Ashley is heard lucidly demanding to be treated as an intelligent woman and admitting to being a really good liar. These are not the ravings of a person disconnected from reality. They are the assertions of a person attempting to control a narrative. Furthermore, the sophisticated planning described by law enforcement using rental cars, swapping license plates, and avoiding cameras demonstrates a high level of cognitive function and an awareness of guilt. Individuals who are legally insane typically do not take complex, calculated steps to cover their tracks because they do not understand that their actions are wrong. The prosecution will likely argue that her specific efforts to evade detection prove she was fully aware of the nature of her actions. The third pillar of the legal analysis concerns the jurisdiction of the case. Legal analyst Rick Grundy raised a critical question regarding why the case is being prosecuted in California when the tragic event occurred in Utah. The investigation involves federal agencies like the FBI, yet the charges are filed at the state level in California. This suggests that the prosecution is operating under the theory that the intent to commit the crime was formed in California before the trip began. This jurisdictional puzzle implies that the legal team believes the road trip itself was part of the commission of the crime, allowing the state of origin to retain authority. However, this adds a layer of complexity to the trial. The defense may challenge this venue, arguing that the case should be heard in Utah, where the discovery was made. The interplay between state lines and federal involvement, evidenced by the FBI's role in the arrest, creates a legal labyrinth that will need to be navigated before a jury is even seated. Ultimately, The defense strategy will likely attempt to cast doubt on the timeline or the intent, perhaps leaning into the conflicting narratives Ashley presented to her friends. They may argue that her strange behavior was a result of a mental break rather than criminal malice. However, the ballistic match linking the casing at her home to the scene in Utah remains a formidable obstacle. As the pretrial motions begin, the court must weigh the sophisticated planning against the psychological profile of a mother accused of the unthinkable. While the community waits to see if the scales of justice will balance for Melodee, while the forensic evidence and legal strategies form the technical backbone of this case, the emotional core lies with those who are left behind to mourn. In the wake of the arrest, the paternal family of Melodee stepped forward to share their perspective, offering a heartbreaking glimpse into the life of the daughter before the tragedy occurred. It is important to note that Melodee's biological father is deceased, a fact that placed the sole responsibility for her care and upbringing upon her mother, Ashley Buzzard. This family dynamic meant that the paternal grandparents were the primary link to her father's legacy, watching from the periphery as the situation unfolded. In interviews conducted after the charges were made public, these family members expressed a profound sense of shock mixed with a lingering, intuitive dread. They described their interactions with Melodee during the time she stayed with them or visited. One relative noted that during these periods, the daughter appeared to be happy, but also possessed a demeanor that they described as quiet. This observation is significant in retrospect. In the context of familial relationships, silence in a young family member is often interpreted as shyness. Yet, in light of the allegations, analysts now question if it was a sign of conditioned behavior or an internal struggle to navigate a difficult home environment. The grandfather shared a poignant sentiment that resonates with many who follow such cases. He stated that while he could not point to specific evidence of danger at the time, his intuition warned him. "I know in my heart told me something was wrong," he admitted during the interview. This conflict between tangible evidence and gut instinct is a common theme in domestic tragedies. Families often feel a sense of unease, a red flag that is felt rather than seen, but without concrete proof of harm. They feel powerless to intervene. This admission highlights the psychological burden carried by extended family members who now grapple with the question of whether that intuition could have been acted upon. A central point of anguish for the paternal family revolves around the legal history of custody. They raised questions about how Ashley was able to regain full custody of the daughter despite what they perceived as past issues. The grandfather mentioned that he did not understand the whole rules of the system, but recalled that Ashley had gone through some type of recourse to secure visitation rights, which eventually evolved into the arrangement in place at the time of the disappearance. This confusion reflects a broader societal frustration with family court systems, which prioritize reunification but can sometimes overlook subtle warning signs. The family's narrative also touches on the missed signs that the community is now analyzing. They observed Ashley during custody exchanges and weekends, yet the sophisticated deception alleged by police, the ability to plan and hide intentions, meant that the mother likely presented a mask of normalcy to them as well. The grandfather's recollection that Melodee would say, "Mom, it's okay," when asked if everything was all right, suggests a loyalty or a protective instinct that the daughter held toward her mother. This dynamic complicates the ability of outsiders to detect distress, as the subject of the concern is often the one reassuring the adults that they are safe. The paternal relatives are now left with only memories and the haunting realization that their heart warnings were accurate. Their voices add a layer of personal tragedy to the clinical details of the investigation. They are not just witnesses to a crime. They are the survivors of a loss that was, in their view, preventable if the systems of custody and protection had been more attuned to the intuitive alarms they felt. As the legal case against Ashley proceeds, the grief of the father's family stands as a testament to the daughter who was failed by the very person entrusted with her protection. As the investigation into the tragedy involving Ashley Buzzard and her daughter unfolded, a disturbing psychological profile began to emerge, one that shifted the focus from the physical evidence to the internal workings of the suspect's mind. While the ballistic matches and surveillance footage provided the how and the where, they did not fully answer the why. To understand the motivation behind such a calculated and ruthless act, observers and analysts have turned their attention to the behavioral cues exhibited by the mother, particularly those captured in the secret recording. This evidence points toward a phenomenon often cited in modern criminal psychology, a profound sense of narcissism, or what cultural commentators frequently refer to as main character syndrome. This psychological framework suggests that the individual views themselves as the central protagonist of reality, with all other people, including their own family members, serving merely as supporting characters or, in darker scenarios, as obstacles to their personal narrative. In the case of Ashley Buzzard, the audio recording provided by the witness, Tyler, serves as a masterclass in this distorted self-perception. When faced with questions about the whereabouts of her missing daughter, Ashley did not exhibit the hysteria or the desperate pleading typical of a grieving parent. Instead, she demanded validation of her own status. In the recording, her voice is firm and commanding as she instructs the listener to quiet and listen. "Please look at me like I'm an intelligent woman, 40 years old." This specific phrasing is incredibly revealing. At a moment when the conversation should have been entirely focused on the safety and location of the vulnerable family member, Ashley centered the dialogue on her own intelligence and the respect she felt she was owed. Legal analysts suggest that this indicates a person who is more concerned with maintaining their persona and controlling how they are perceived than they are with the reality of the crisis at hand. The demand to be seen as intelligent stands in stark contrast to the bizarre and illogical story she was simultaneously telling about giving her daughter away to strangers. It implies that she believed her intellect was superior enough to make an unbelievable lie sound plausible. Furthermore, Ashley's comments regarding the media attention betray a deep-seated obsession with her public image. In the audio, she refers to the situation as false advertising and explicitly mentions being on a media news talk show. Instead of viewing the police investigation as a search for truth, she appears to view it as a public relations problem, or, even more disturbingly, as a moment of fame that is not going according to her script. The use of the term false advertising is clinical and detached. It reduces the accusation of ending a life to a mere misrepresentation of her character. This detachment is a hallmark of narcissistic behavior, where the accused feels the subjectized by the consequences of their own actions, believing that the world is treating them unfairly by holding them accountable. The narrative she constructed to explain the absence of the daughter further illuminates this main character mindset. Ashley claimed she handed the daughter over to a couple she met at a zoo. Analysts have deconstructed this lie, noting how it treats the daughter not as a human being with rights and a future, but as a commodity that can be transacted or discarded when it becomes inconvenient. By inventing a story where she simply gives away the responsibility of parenthood to random individuals without even securing their names or contact information, this statement could be interpreted as a sign that the responsibility was viewed as a burden. In her version of reality, she was the protagonist who needed to be free, and the daughter was the plot point holding her back. This burden theory is central to understanding the potential motive. Investigative reporters and social commentators have speculated that the sophisticated plan to remove the daughter was driven by a desire to start a new life, one unencumbered by the responsibilities of single parenthood. The meticulous nature of the preparation, the road trip, the rental cars, the license plate swapping suggests that this was not a crime of passion, but a lifestyle correction in the mind of the perpetrator. She allegedly wanted to rewrite her story, and in that new draft, there was no room for the daughter. The community's reaction to these revelations has been one of horror and disbelief. It is difficult for the average person to comprehend a mindset that prioritizes personal freedom or a fresh start over the existence of those in their care. However, experts in criminal behavior warn that for a person with severe narcissistic traits, the needs of others, no matter how young or dependent, are invisible. The main character does not feel the pain of the supporting cast. They only feel the inconvenience the cast causes them. When Ashley returned to California alone on October the 10th, living her life as if nothing had changed, she was essentially living out the new narrative she had written for herself. It appeared as though the obstacle and resumed her role as the solo lead. The tragedy lies in the fact that this delusion was so strong that she believed she could outsmart the FBI, the local police, and the forensic science that ultimately linked her to the scene in the Utah desert. The intelligent woman she claimed to be on the recording failed to realize that in the real world, actions have forensic consequences that no amount of manipulation can talk away. The main character syndrome blinded Ashley to the humanity of the subject, reducing a vibrant life to an expendable asset. As the trial approaches, this psychological profile will likely be a key battleground, with the prosecution painting her as a ruthless narcissist and the defense struggling to humanize a woman who, by her own recorded words, seemed to care more about her reputation than the life she is accused of ending. The silence of the daughter in the desert is the tragic cost of the mother's desire to be the center of her own universe. While the criminal investigation focused on the actions of Ashley Buzzard, a broader and perhaps more unsettling conversation has emerged regarding the systems that allowed the subject to vanish without immediate notice. Beyond the forensic evidence and the timeline of the road trip, experts are now scrutinizing the educational framework that failed to register the absence of the daughter. Private investigator Manuel Gomez provided a critical analysis of this failure during a discussion on the case. He noted that while the Board of Education maintains a unified system throughout the 50 states, when it comes to traditional schooling requirements, the landscape for homeschooling is vastly different. In a standard school setting, a student's daily attendance is monitored. If a student fails to appear, there are protocols in place. Parents are contacted, truancy officers may be involved, and eventually, welfare checks are initiated. This system acts as a de facto safety net, ensuring that the subjects are seen by mandatory reporters, teachers, counselors, and administrators on a daily basis. However, Gomez pointed out that there is no such standardization for the homeschooling process. The regulations vary wildly from state to state, creating a patchwork of oversight that can be easily exploited by those with malicious intent. In the specific context of this case, the investigator highlighted the leniency of the laws in California. According to his assessment, the requirements in that jurisdiction are very, very minimal. This leniency meant that the daughter did not have to physically show up at a facility, nor was she required to speak directly to teachers or administrators to verify her well-being. This lack of mandatory face-to-face contact created a blind spot in the system, allowing the mother to withdraw the daughter from the public eye without raising an immediate alarm. Legal analyst Rick Grundy expanded on this issue, framing the sudden decision to homeschool as a potential red flag that agencies need to recognize. He argued that while many parents choose homeschooling for legitimate educational or religious reasons, the system must be astute enough to distinguish between genuine instruction and calculated isolation. Grundy emphasized that when a parent abruptly decides to remove a student from the school system simply to keep them in a hole or to cut off their contact with the outside world, that should trigger an inquiry. He stated, "If a student is being isolated in a home, that's a red flag right there." The investigation suggests that Ashley Buzzard was able to leverage this lack of oversight to her advantage. By opting out of the traditional school system, she effectively removed the daughter from the community's radar. There were no teachers to notice a drop in mood, no school nurses to document physical changes, and no classmates to ask where she had gone. This isolation is a critical component of the tragedy. As Grundy noted, the main function of the school system is not just academic education, it is to socialize the subject and prepare them to become a functional adult. When that connection is severed, the student loses their primary link to the community and their voice. The consequences of this regulatory gap have led to calls for significant legislative reform. Experts are now advocating for what they term a Melodee standard. This proposed standard would mandate a uniform set of rules across all jurisdictions to ensure that homeschooled students are monitored effectively. The goal of such a standard would be to prevent this exact scenario from recurring. It would likely require regular, in-person check-ins with educational professionals or state representatives to visually verify the safety and well-being of the student. The conversation around the Melodee standard highlights a reactive tendency in our legal system often. Laws are only strengthened after a tragedy has exposed their weaknesses. Gomez expressed a hope that if one positive thing could come from this heartbreak, it would be a change in the system that forces a higher level of accountability. He argued that we need to monitor students to ensure they are safe, regardless of whether they are educated in a classroom or at a dining table. Furthermore, the failure here was not just about laws, but about the lack of communication between agencies. The experts discussed the necessity for schools, protective services, and community organizations to talk to one another. In this case, the silence of the daughter was matched by the silence between the institutions meant to protect her. The checkbox approach to homeschooling, where a parent simply files a form and is left alone, proved to be fatal. It allowed the timeline of the disappearance to stretch on for weeks, as there was no external institution expecting the daughter to arrive on Monday morning. The minimal requirement for homeschooling in California meant that the mother did not have to answer to anyone regarding the daily whereabouts of the daughter. This bureaucratic invisibility gave the suspect the time and space to allegedly plan the sophisticated road trip and the subsequent cover-up without fear of immediate intervention from educational authorities. The lesson drawn by analysts is clear. Education laws must balance parental rights with the state's obligation to ensure that no student becomes invisible. Legal experts and investigators reviewing the case have pointed to a breakdown not just in individual decision-making, but in the structural philosophy of how these agencies operate. Legal analyst Rick Grundy provided a sobering assessment of the current state of these protective systems. He identified two primary areas where the criminal justice system and social services intersect with disastrous results: the handling of individuals in troubled homes and the management of mental health issues. According to his analysis, the handling of the subjects in need is often characterized by a lack of resources, suggesting that the system is largely underfunded. This lack of funding creates an environment where caseworkers are overwhelmed. Cases are prioritized based on immediate, visible emergencies, and quieter, more subtle signs of distress, like those in the Buzzard household, are overlooked. A central point of contention is the guiding philosophy of these agencies. As Grundy noted, the heart of social services throughout the country is to reunite, to keep together the family unit. This goal of reunification is noble, in theory, designed to preserve familial bonds. However, in practice, it can become a dangerous blinder. In this case, Ashley Buzzard had previously lost custody, but was able to regain it. The system's default setting to restore parental rights may have overridden concerns about her stability. When the priority is to keep the parent and the daughter together, the threshold for removing a vulnerable individual becomes dangerously high, requiring undeniable proof of harm rather than just red flags or intuition. This leads to the issue of interagency silence. A recurring theme in the expert analysis of this case is the lack of communication between the various pillars of community safety. Grundy emphasized that the school, the community services, the police, and social services need to speak to one another. In the timeline of this tragedy, these entities operated in isolation. The school officials likely did not know about the police or court history. The police were not informed of the educational withdrawal, and social services were not alerted to the sudden isolation. This fragmentation meant that while each agency might have held a small piece of the puzzle, no one possessed the full picture that would have revealed the imminent danger to the daughter. Furthermore, the system is criticized for being reactive rather than proactive. Agencies are often described as waiting by the phone for a crisis call to come in before they take action. Grundy argued that this passive approach is insufficient. He stated that agencies need to be more aggressive and assertive when warning signs appear. In a situation where a parent is actively hiding the truth, backing cars into spots to hide plates, lying about whereabouts, and withdrawing from school, a reactive system is easily defeated. If the agency waits for a report, and the perpetrator ensures there are no witnesses to file that report, the system effectively ceases to function. Private investigator Manuel Gomez offered a specific example of how this reactive nature failed in the legal realm as well. He noted that if the family had notified the authorities or filed for a custody order immediately upon suspecting danger, the agency would have been forced to act. A court order would have mandated a physical check on the daughter. However, because the system relies on these external triggers, a phone call, a filing, a formal complaint, and because those triggers were not pulled in time, the agency remained dormant. Gomez lamented that if they had taken action immediately, the outcome might have been different. The red flags were present, but they were not interpreted as a collective emergency. The sudden shift to homeschooling, the isolation from the extended family, and the mother's history were all indicators that, if viewed together, pointed to a high-risk environment. Grundy pointed out that when the subject is isolated in a home, that alone should be the catalyst for an inquiry. The failure to recognize isolation as a form of danger is a policy gap that this case has painfully exposed. In conclusion, this highlights that the tragedy was not just the result of one individual's actions, but the result of a service agency that needs to grow and adapt to modern complexities. The transportation of a young family member that is interconnected and inquisitive, not one that is fragmented and passive. The safety net had holes large enough for a rental car to drive through, carrying the subject across state lines while the agencies charged with her protection remained unaware that she was even missing. The lesson for the future is clear. The goal of reunification cannot supersede the mandate of safety, and silence between agencies is as dangerous as the silence of the desert itself. The period between October the 10th, when Ashley Buzzard returned to her residence in California, and December the 23rd, when she was formally taken into custody, represents one of the most perplexing phases of this entire investigation. For over 2 months, the suspect lived within the community, maintaining a facade of normalcy while the young family member lay undiscovered in the remote wilderness of Utah. Upon her return from the road trip, the immediate behavior of the mother did not reflect the distress one would anticipate from a parent whose daughter was missing. Instead, investigators and neighbors observed what has been described as a business-as-usual attitude. The routine of the household appeared to resume, yet there was a glaring absence. The daughter was no longer present. In criminal analysis, this ability to compartmentalize, to separate the reality of the tragedy from the performance of daily living, is often a significant indicator of culpability. It suggests that the individual has psychologically resolved the event and is focused entirely on self-preservation rather than the welfare of the victim. One of the most damning pieces of behavioral evidence that emerged during this timeline was the treatment of public awareness efforts. In many missing person cases, the family is the driving force behind the search, plastering the neighborhood with flyers and pleading for media coverage. However, reports in this case indicate a starkly different reality. Witnesses observed Ashley allegedly pulling down a missing person poster that had been displayed. This action is aggressive and obstructionist. It goes beyond mere passivity. It is an active attempt to erase the memory of the daughter from the public consciousness. By removing the image of the missing individual, the suspect was arguably trying to suppress the inquiry and control the narrative, ensuring that neighbors did not ask uncomfortable questions. During this interim period, when questions did arise, Ashley reportedly relied on the fabricated narrative regarding the couple at the zoo. She told associates that she had given the daughter to a pair of strangers, a story that she maintained despite its inherent lack of logic. This specific lie served a dual purpose during the timeline of deception. First, it provided a convenient explanation for the daughter's absence without admitting to a permanent tragedy. Second, It deflected responsibility onto phantom figures, people who could not be found because they did not exist. This type of deflection allows the suspect to portray themselves as a victim of circumstance or bad judgment, rather than the architect of a fatal outcome. The community's role during these weeks is also a subject of analysis. To the outside world, the silence from the Buzzard home was deceptive. Without the frantic energy usually associated with a disappearance, many may have assumed that the daughter was simply staying with other relatives or that the situation was a private family matter. This speaks to the effectiveness of the suspect's mask of sanity. By avoiding emotional displays and maintaining a calm exterior, she was able to blend in, effectively hiding in plain sight while the investigation by law enforcement was quietly ramping up in the background. It is also crucial to examine the psychological state required to maintain this deception for such an extended duration. For weeks, Ashley woke up every morning in a home that was empty of her daughter. Yet she continued to engage with the world as an intelligent woman, as she later described herself in the secret recording. This suggests a profound level of narcissism, where the suspect believes they can outsmart the authorities and that their version of reality will eventually be accepted. The false advertising she complained about was, in reality, the truth slowly catching up to her. Comparison with other high-profile cases reveals a pattern often seen in these scenarios. Criminologists frequently cite the relief exhibited by certain suspects after the removal of a family member they perceived as a burden. During the weeks of silence, Ashley was essentially living the new life she had allegedly sought, a life without the responsibilities of parenthood. This period was not a time of mourning for her. It was a time of perceived freedom. However, this freedom was built on a foundation of lies that began to crumble the moment the discovery was made in Utah on December the 6th. Even after the remains were found, there was a gap of over 2 weeks before the arrest. During this final stretch of the timeline, the pressure on the suspect must have been immense. The identification process was underway, and the ballistic match was being confirmed in the lab. Yet, publicly, the deception continued until the very end. The timeline of deception reveals that the most chilling aspect of this case is not just the incident in the desert, but the capability of the mother to return home and erase the existence of her daughter from her daily life, treating the tragic loss as a problem that had been solved rather than a catastrophe that had occurred. To fully comprehend the gravity of the legal situation facing Ashley Buzzard, it is necessary to widen the lens and examine the broader context of federal intervention in domestic tragedies. While the investigation began as a local missing person case in California, the involvement of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, signals a significant escalation in severity. This dynamic is mirrored in another high-profile case currently capturing national attention, which shares disturbing parallels regarding the themes of control, surveillance, and the intervention of federal authorities. By analyzing the indictment of South Carolina pastor John Paul Miller, we can better understand the legal mechanisms at play when a domestic situation crosses the line into a federal crime. The case of the pastor offers a grim comparative study in the use of sophisticated methods to exert control over a family member. John Paul Miller has been federally indicted for cyberstalking his estranged wife, Micah, in the months leading up to her tragic passing. While the outcome for Micah was a loss of life by her own hand, rather than the direct action of another, as alleged in the Buzzard case, the federal charges focus on the unwanted and harassing communications and the technological surveillance that preceded the tragedy. Just as Ashley Buzzard is accused of using rental cars and license plate manipulation to hide her movements, the pastor is accused of using technology to track the movements of his wife. The indictment alleges that the pastor placed tracking devices on his wife's vehicle, effectively removing her ability to move freely without his knowledge. This mirrors the level of calculation seen in the Utah case. In both instances, the accused individuals allegedly utilized tools, whether they be physical vehicles or digital trackers, to manipulate the environment around the victim. The federal prosecutors in the South Carolina case also allege that the pastor damaged the tires of his wife's car and interfered with her finances. These actions are not crimes of passion. They are crimes of systemic dismantling, designed to break down the independence and stability of the target. The specific charge of cyberstalking is particularly relevant to modern investigations. It highlights how the weaponization of communication and technology has become a focus for federal law enforcement. The indictment states that on one single occasion, the pastor allegedly contacted the victim over 50 times in one day. This relentless barrage of contact serves to create a psychological prison, much like the physical isolation the daughter in the Buzzard case experienced during the road trip. The FBI's involvement in both cases underscores a critical legal principle. When a crime involves interstate commerce, like the internet or phone lines, or crosses state borders, like the drive from California to Utah, it falls under federal jurisdiction. Legal analysts point out that federal charges often bring different sentencing guidelines and resources than state charges. In the case of the pastor, he is also accused of making false statements to federal investigators. This is a charge that often accompanies complex investigations where the suspect attempts to mislead the FBI. We see a parallel in the Buzzard investigation, where the conflicting narratives and the bizarre stories about the zoo could potentially be viewed as attempts to derail the federal inquiry. When the FBI steps in, the margin for error for the suspect shrinks dramatically. The resources available to federal agents, such as the ability to analyze vast amounts of digital data or track minute forensic details across state lines, are far superior to those of a local sheriff's department. Furthermore, the role of the victim in collecting evidence is a heartbreaking contrast between the two cases. In the pastor's case, the family's attorney, Regina Ward, revealed that the wife had preserved and turned over text messages and documents to her legal counsel before her passing. She essentially testified from beyond the grave, providing the roadmap for the indictment. In the case of the young daughter in Utah, she was unable to collect or preserve evidence of her own plight. She relied entirely on the protection of her mother, the very person now accused of ending her life. This difference highlights the extreme vulnerability of the daughter. Unlike an adult who can document harassment, a dependent the individual has no voice and no recourse. They are often the culmination of a long period of behavior characterized by control and planning. Whether it is the alleged cyberstalking of a spouse or the alleged calculated removal of a daughter, the common thread is the perpetrator's desire to manipulate the reality of the victim. The FBI's presence in the arrest of Ashley Buzzard and the indictment of John Paul Miller sends a powerful message. The legal system is evolving to catch those who think they can use complexity, technology, or state lines to hide their actions. As we look toward the conclusion of the Buzzard case, the federal aspect remains a looming shadow. While the current charges are for the taking of a life, the sophistication of the plot involving the road trip could theoretically open the door to further federal scrutiny regarding the transportation of a victim across state lines. The analysis of these parallel cases reveals a justice system that is increasingly intolerant of sophisticated domestic abuse, using the full weight of federal power to peel back the layers of deception and expose the ruthlessness hidden beneath. As we reach the conclusion of this extensive analysis into the tragedy involving Ashley Buzzard and her daughter, we are left not with a resolution, but with a profound set of questions that challenge our understanding of justice, parental responsibility, and the systems designed to protect the vulnerable. The journey that began with a departure from California on October the 7th and ended with a discovery in the Utah desert on December the 6th is a narrative marked by silence. The silence of the desert, the silence of the daughter, and the alleged deceptive silence of the mother. Currently, the legal proceedings are in their nascent stages. Ashley Buzzard stands accused of the intentional taking of a life, a charge she has formally denied with a plea of not guilty entered during her arraignment. This plea sets the stage for what promises to be a complex and heavily scrutinized trial. The prosecution has signaled its intent to prove that the act was not a result of a mental break, but rather the outcome of criminal sophistication and premeditation. They will rely heavily on the forensic evidence, the ballistic match between the casing found at the home and the one found in the desert, the timeline of the rental vehicles, and the calculated evasion of surveillance cameras. The decision by the district attorney not to seek the death penalty remains a pivotal point of discussion. While some observers may view this as leniency given the cold-blooded nature of the allegations described by the sheriff, legal analysts suggest it is a strategic move designed to expedite the process and secure a conviction that ensures the defendant never walks free again. By removing the capital punishment element, the state avoids decades of mandatory appeals, potentially bringing a faster sense of closure to the paternal family who has waited in agony for answers. However, the impact of this case extends far beyond the courtroom. The investigation has exposed a critical vulnerability in our educational and social safety nets. The Melodee standard, as proposed by experts like private investigator Manuel Gomez, represents a necessary evolution in how society monitors the well-being of the individuals. The current patchwork of homeschooling regulations, which allowed the daughter to be withdrawn from public view without a safety check, has been identified as a systemic failure. The proposed standard would require a uniform system of oversight across all states, ensuring that no student can simply disappear from the roster without a verified, in-person welfare check. If enacted, such a standard would serve as the most significant legacy of this tragedy. It would ensure that the isolation used as a weapon in this case could not be easily replicated by others. As Gomez stated, the goal is to ensure that we monitor these situations so that this doesn't happen again. It is a call for the system to prioritize the safety of the student over the privacy of the parent, recognizing that the right to educate at home does not include the right to hide a vulnerable individual from the protective eyes of the community. The case also serves as a grim reminder of the main character syndrome discussed by commentators. The secret recording of Ashley demanding to be treated as an intelligent woman while allegedly concealing the fate of her daughter stands as a monument to the dangers of narcissism. It warns us that appearances can be deceiving, that a parent returning home alone and resuming a business-as-usual life may be masking a horrific reality. The community's role, therefore, must shift from passive observation to active engagement. The red flags, the isolation, the strange stories. The sudden absence must be met with curiosity and, when necessary, intervention. As the legal team prepares for trial, the memory of the daughter remains the central focus. She was the individual described by her grandfather as happy but quiet, a silence that perhaps hid the turmoil of her home life. Her final journey across state lines was a route of betrayal, but the investigation that followed has been a route of truth-seeking. The forensic science, the dedication of the FBI, and the persistence of the local authorities have ensured that she was not forgotten in the wilderness. In closing, while the presumption of innocence applies to Ashley Buzzard until proven guilty in a court of law, the evidence presented in the public record paints a disturbing picture of a ruthless plan executed with chilling precision. The path forward is twofold. First, to see the judicial process through to a just verdict, and second, to repair the holes in our social fabric so that no other daughter is forced to travel that silent route alone. The Melodee Standard is not just a policy proposal. It is a moral imperative. Disclaimer: this analysis is based on public reporting, police statements, and court documents available as of the current date. All individuals charged with a crime are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes regarding the legal and investigative aspects of the case.